Good morning, folks. My name is Blake Sanders. I'm the Executive Director of SGCI. I'm joined here today by IBé Crawley. She's a book artist and sculptor based in Virginia and the founder of the IBé Art Institute. Welcome, IBé. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You were born in Danville, Virginia, and attended VCU for undergrad and your master's in education degrees. Could you please share a bit of what your childhood was like in Danville and what was your path to college? And if you want to share what your experience was like in Richmond in the city and as a student, that'd be great.
Thank you. It's so nice to see you again. And thank you for this opportunity to talk about my life and my work.
Absolutely.
I am from Danville, Virginia. I was born in the 1950s, and I lived through the Civil Rights Movement. My grandfather was a civil rights worker. He led a protest. The young people wanted to go to the public library, but they weren't allowed to go to the public library because it was segregated. And they wanted to go to the white library.
Sure.
They were in high school at Langston High School, which was a great high school back in the 1960s. So my grandfather led a group of young people to the courthouse steps. He led them to the public library and through the parks. And that really, as a little girl growing up, listening to the argument at the dining room table about, nonviolent direct action, really touched my life. My grandfather was a taxi driver, and he was very active in our community. He went to the third grade, but he read the newspaper from cover to cover all week, and he shared it with a neighbor. He was a very independent man, and his grandfather and his father had been born enslaved and lived through sharecropping. So my grandfather was very determined to be an independent broker. So he bought a taxi and he started a taxi stand, and he drove the Black people to their jobs in the factories and the mills, and he really knew the community. So when I was a child, I was always in the taxi with him, and I got to meet people in the community and go to the late night shift to pick up people at 12 o'clock, who were getting off work or going to work. And so I have a deep love for my community in Danville, where I was raised, and my parents, grandparents, and all the sacrifices they made in the 1960s. My grandfather went to jail. My cousin went to jail. I had a cousin, she was beaten by the police. And then to sit at the dining room table for 10 years and listen to them talk about their experience because they were actively involved in a court case that lasted until the 1970s. So I guess about the time I was ready to go to college, and I graduated from high school early, because every year my grandmother would say, hey, you should take a class in school for the summer or two, so that you can get some extra credit. But it was also a way of keeping me safe, because it was a safe place to be. So I went to summer school. So I graduated from high school when I was 16, and I decided I wanted to go to VCU. But we didn't have any money. My father worked in the factory, and I think he made like $5,000 a year. He was like, baby, I can't send you to college. And my grandfather was like, well, some of his people that he knew from the Civil Rights Movement, one of the things that he had done during the Civil Rights Movement is he and my cousin Lawrence Campbell had invited Dr. Martin Luther King to Danville to assist with the protest, because they weren't getting very much newspaper coverage. And so he was the first person arrested. Dr. King came 3 times, but he wasn't there on Bloody Monday. And Bloody Monday was the day that the police came out in full force against the protesters. So my grandfather went to jail, but he was represented by a Black woman. She was a lawyer. Her name was Ruth Harvey Charity. And I remember her forever. And I still have the court papers, the demands that she made to the judge for the images from the protest. That was very powerful. It made me want to be a lawyer. But my grandfather went to her and said, I wanted to go to college. She said she thought she could help me. And so they came up with the money. And my father had a cousin who had been to college, and she helped us with some paperwork. And that's how I got into VCU when I was 17 years old. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do with a degree, but I knew I wanted to go to college. So I did VCU for 4 years, and I graduated with an English degree. And but I was very interested in my community. So I worked with folks who were either homeless, worked in homeless shelters. I worked in a battered women's shelter. I worked with children who were in kindergarten. I worked with men and women, being released from city jails and penitentiaries. I created a little program where they worked on skills to reconnect with their children and their family members. So I did a lot of social work. I worked with handicapped adults or adults in wheelchairs. So I felt like I was really getting a deeper understanding of what people needed and wanted. And I was learning people's stories. And I've always been a storyteller. So that's how I ended up becoming a storyteller, was that when I was a child, my great grandmother would always tell us stories. But as I grew older, I realized that the power of my storytelling is my ability to tell stories about people and the stories that people share with me, and to make sense out of stories. So I'm a sculptor and I am a book artist. And what I do is I take the stories that I learn from people, the stories I learned from life or from history or from my own research, and I try to make them visual, something that people can see and touch and feel, that they can create themselves. And so that's what I do. I tell stories of life that I've learned and try to make it visual.
That's terrific.
That was a long answer.
I like long answers. This is
Thank you.
meant to be a full conversation, not just sticking to the script. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So as you said, before returning to VCU for your master's, you worked for several years as a social worker. Can you talk a little bit more about how you synthesize this difficult and deeply empathetic work into your art making practice?
So see, I think that there are rituals that occur in social gatherings, in social work, in my experience with working or sitting at a dining room table with my family, that whole circle. And we did that regularly. So in my family, we ate dinner together every night. And we also ate together every Sunday. It was a larger gathering. So that sense of sitting in a circle and hearing people tell their stories, their concerns, the relationships that develop around food and the ritual of food and the daily act of food and the daily act of what we learn about each other by the things that become important to us, the stories that we tell. So I think that going into social work situations, for me, the biggest thing was the circle that we formed, that bond, and understanding that the people I worked with were not perfect. Oftentimes, they had made a pretty bad choice at some point in their life that caused them to be in a situation where they needed to be in the circle. And so there's an acknowledgement or an expectation of repair. And so that's part of the circle work, is repair work. And so listening to people talk about how they got to where they are and their understanding of what they need to do to be a better person or to correct a situation or to build a bridge. I think that comes through in my storytelling, because when I try to convey stories to people, I try to do that full circle, that understanding that we are in circle with each other. We're in dialogue with each other. Even you and I happen to be in conversation with each other because of a breach that occurred, and we had to acknowledge the breach, and then we had to say, how can I participate in repairing the breach? So that's the circle process, whether you're dealing with civil rights, human rights, individual family relationships. And so I think for me, it's reflected in the work, because that's what I bring to the work, is that sense that the work is about and is connected to the healing ritual of acknowledgement and repair.
After working in schools for many years, you chose to found the IBé Arts Institute. How did your time in education inspire the formation of this organization and now the gallery in residency? And how did it build on your time? How does it build on your time in the classroom, and how does it differ from a traditional classroom experience?
Ooh, that's a lot. First, I want to say that IBé Art Institute is an old school building, and it's in Hopewell, and it was built in 1830, and
Mhm.
it was a two-room schoolhouse,
Wow.
and it was used as a school building from 1830 to about 1860. And then in 1860, the Civil War occurred,
Right.
and Grant had his headquarters here on this plantation. So this is an old plantation called the Appomattox House,
Mhm.
and it's the Epps plantation, and it was probably about 2,200 acres large,
Mhm.
and it went back to the 1600s, and it's on the James River, and it's the last largest entry point for the boats that come off the Chesapeake Bay and enter to sell enslaved people back in the 1800s. And so during the Civil War, it was also used as part of the Civil War hospital. So the injured were housed here and in the field out in front of me,
Mhm.
facing the water.
Mhm.
So when I heard about this property, I didn't know what it was. I was just told it was a school, and I thought it was going to be a place that I could come and start an education program. You
Mhm.
see, I had worked for 30 years as a teacher. So I taught everything from kindergarten to college.
Mhm.
And I worked with everyone from folks with special needs to the gifted and talented. I'd worked in large group, I'd worked in small group, I had done English and math and science, I had done history, I had done international baccalaureate, and I retired. And when I retired, I knew I had this wealth of skills that was related to storytelling, but related to a practice that allowed me to be able to measure my productivity because it was structured. It was in a school building. I was given a certain number of students each year. I was given a curriculum. I had to measure their growth. I had to measure myself as an instructor, and they had to measure me. So there was a lot of feedback and data. In my last 5 years, I became a data analyst in the school because I was very interested in looking at, well, how do teachers do in this regard when they work together as a group and create a lesson based upon the individual curriculums that they merge them together. Very much similar to what we're doing when we're in the storytelling circle. So I had that experience of the crossover between being an educator and a storyteller and a teacher leader in Fairfax my last few years working there. So when I retired, I knew I had a set of skills, and I was like, okay, I live in Washington, D.C. There's tremendous need in Anacostia, which is, a low income area where it's very condensed and there's just a lot going on. And there was a real need there. So I said, well, I'll do a little volunteer. I'll go into the school and after school program and I work with kids, and get them to create stories. I'll do community projects. I had a little building there that I call IBé Arts, and we do May Day Play Day and invite kids in the neighborhood, and they would do arts and crafts and storytelling. So I had the sense of I need to be present in the community, and I need to be contributing to the community, and I need to be creating so that the community sees what creativity looks like from me. So I did sculpture and I did book arts and I did a lot of textile work because I learned that as a child. And when I decided that I was going to do IBé Arts Institute here in Hopewell, I said I wanted to be a space where I bring together my skills under one roof. I wanted to have a place where I could show my sculpture, where I could make my books, where I could entertain people around storytelling, listening to their stories, teaching them, having them socialize, forming circles. So that's the impetus for IBé Arts Institute is it's really an opportunity to take a variety of life skills and put them under one roof in one space and interact with community. And so when I say interact with community, I built a relationship with the National Park Service. So I had an opportunity to work with college interns with them. I built a relationship with the local bookstore. so I could do art exhibits in the local bookstore with senior women's groups who were quilters, or traveling artist groups who were educators. And so all of that becomes who I am as IBé Crawley, the storyteller, artist, and IBé Arts Institute is the place where everything kind of comes together under one umbrella.
Yeah, it's lovely. I can say I sort of wish that I had you in the classroom at some point, because I can feel that you must have made great connections with your students, and you're absolutely a compelling
I
story.
like
Yeah. Um, so
Thank you.
so when we talked the other day, you talked about your sort of returning to your art practice, beginning again in sculpture and creating these monuments. Can you share a little bit about how that concept of monuments became the centerpiece of your practice? You talked about creating monuments for Black women in particular. So can you talk a little bit about how that became your sort of guiding principle in your work for a while?
Sure. So my last before I became international baccalaureate was like the last 5 years of my career. But the 5 years before that, I taught high school American history.
Mm-hmm.
And in teaching American history, one of the things that I was aware of after having done it for 25 years is that we tell the same stories over and over.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when they're in the first grade, we tell them George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. And then
Right.
they go to the second grade and we tell them the Constitution and George Washington and Adams. And then they go to the third grade. And so we tell the same story, but we build on it over a 12-year period. Mm-hmm. And so I had an opportunity to go through all of that. And the one thing that I found missing was the story of Black people. Mm-hmm. There was only one story of Black people, and that they were slaves. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't know who these people were who were slaves. They didn't have last names. They didn't have faces. They didn't live anywhere. There was always one image or two images of those Black people that got circulated over and over. So I didn't even have a sense of what they looked like. The same thing was true with Native Americans. I thought it was the most peculiar thing. I couldn't figure out what these people looked like, because all I could see were the drawings in the book, and they seemed like, were they real? Was this something that was just made up, like Cinderella or Goldilocks? Because, you tell the kids the same story over and over, and it gets embellished. So I wasn't really sure what was happening there, and why there were no Black people that I could recognize. Like, I would look around in my world and I'd see Black men, but I didn't see them represented in the history book. There was always this other kind of Black man who was either submissive or untrustworthy, or all of these labels that we got presented to us subliminally in the textbook. And I'm gonna give you a perfect example. This is one of my favorites. It's an image of George Washington. And in it, he is wearing a military uniform. Mm-hmm. And it's a portrait of him. And in the background, over his shoulder, is a Black man. And the Black man is wearing a red uniform, and he's wearing a turban, and he's holding a horse. And I was curious, and I would say to my students, who is that man behind George Washington? And no one knew. Right. And I would talk to teachers about it, but it would be something that was unimportant. It wasn't listed as something that you needed to know. Mm-hmm. So I did research, and I found that this man's name was Billy Lee. And Billy Lee had been George Washington's right hand. And he had been with him even when he surveyed the Appalachia. Mm-hmm. And so I was really curious about Billy Lee. Well, what happened to him? What did he do? He broke both of his legs. He was involved in the American Revolution. Mm-hmm. And he was with George Washington at every campaign, even the Potomac. Mm-hmm. So I was like, why doesn't anyone ever tell his story? It was because he was in the background and no one really ever saw him. And I saw African-American women that way. They were in the background, but no one ever really saw them. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to know, who are these people? How did they live? Where did they live? So when I came back here to Richmond, I live in Richmond. One of the things I was very interested in is Richmond. I had lived here many years ago when I went to college.
Right.
But I knew that Richmond had this kind of undercurrent slave history, but I didn't know what it was because it was talked about, but it wasn't my major when I was in college. Sure. So it wasn't something that I heard anybody ever talking about. When I came back here, I was like I'm curious. Where did the Black people live? You know, did they live on Churchill? Did they live in the East End or the West End? How did that relate to the slave industry? I'm talking people who lived here. Right. And then I found, and this is my current project that I'm working on, I found that where we have 95, which is the Interstate 95 and Interstate 64, it's like an axis covered crossing the city. It sits up high on these stilts. Sometimes you have to go across the city. But beneath that is the bottom. And in that bottom is the train station. And then when you cross over Richmond, you will see the train station, old building from the 1800s. Try to imagine Richmond without 95, which was built probably in 1960, or without 64, but just having this bottom. That's where the Black people live. Right. And I was like, wow, well, who were they? So then I started looking for tax records. I said, well, they must have had addresses. So I said, well, who paid taxes? What Black people paid? So I did this digging until I found the people, and I found their stories, and I found their wills, and I found their deeds. And I was amazed because it was like, wow, I found these people. I dug them up. Yeah. And I think that's the power of the story. And so one of the things, that's my current project. It's called Exchange, and it'll be out in the fall. I'm really excited about this book, and I'm printing it. So that was one of the things that I was going to do when I went. I was planning to do a residency because I was going to do all of the letterpress, and I've spent the entire summer creating these blocks. And just in the last couple of days, this is a fun story. In the last couple of days, I've just created a new map. You know, just another way of visualizing. And that is a whole nother thing. You know, it's kind of like, okay, if I create the map in my head, where do I put this person in this place and that thing? And once I've done all of that in my head, how do I visualize it so that someone else can see it? And then can I go deeper and say, what were the relationships between these people? He did this and she did that. And did they know each other? And did their paths cross? So that's what I do. I tell stories in my head, and then I try to create them into reality. And I don't know if I answered your question.
That's okay. I love that. I love that sort of level of investigation. I like how you've been talking about sort of taking other people's stories, listening to other people's stories, synthesizing other people's stories, and able to express their stories to others. You know, in fine art printmaking, there's fine art presses that collaborate with artists. They make a piece of art in whatever medium they want, and then a master printer synthesizes that and creates the matrices to reproduce that. And that seems like a similar thing where it's you're trying to be as truthful or as accurate to the story that you were told, but also tell it in a way that is it's reproducible and understandable to another audience. I think that's really great. We were talking about when I asked the question about the monuments. Part of what we talked about when we talked the other day was that you were speaking with one of your colleagues at the school, and when you were asking about monuments, you want to fill us in on that?
Oh yeah, that was a lesson. It was a tremendous learning experience because on this particular occasion, and I told you representation is so important. And I don't know if I shared the story, but I think I did. And one day I was co-teaching with another teacher, and a student raised her hand. And it was a large class, maybe about 26 students. And it was a history class, American history class, 11th graders. And she raised her hand, and I called on her, and she said, Mrs. Crawley, do you know who you remind me of? And I thought to myself, that's never a good question. And I said, no, I do not. And she said, Aunt Jemima. And I was like, oh, okay. Thinking about what do I do with this? And
Yeah.
so as I went through, thinking about it, I said, you have to be really careful when you do public kind of comparisons between people and what we call now anime or icons or images
Yeah.
or stereotypes, because one is a real person and one is an idea. And then you have to go deep with what's meant with those ideas. What, like the Marlboro Man. There's ideas that go with the Marlboro Man. So you have to evaluate all of that. So that's not a good practice of comparing people with things or
Right.
I don't know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, my colleague at the end, after class was over, he said to me, well, I don't understand why that upset you so much. My grandma had a mammy. And once again, I was struck by the notion of an icon
Yeah.
in ways that I hadn't really thought about myself. Like I never thought about myself in relationship to Aunt Jemima, but here someone else had. And I had to figure out what that meant to them. And what did it mean to me? And how was that the same or different? And it didn't feel good.
Yeah.
Because it didn't seem like it was whole or real. And the same thing was true with his idea that his grandma had had a mammy. What did that mean?
Yeah.
And how did that relate to me? And how does that relate to history and the history that we teach? And so I said to him, we don't do enough with teaching about Black people and women in American history. We tell the same man's story over and over and over for 12 years. And at the end, that's what we test them on. And that's all they need to know. So when they don't know anything else, we give them an out because we haven't taught them anything else. We need to be teaching the range of humanity, not just a simple stereotype or idea. And he said, well, and I was asking about women and African Americans. He said, well, what monuments have they created? What parts of history did they write? What parts of the government did they build? And at that moment, it occurred to me that there was this criteria for being included. Access depends upon a key. And we didn't have the key. We hadn't built any monuments. We hadn't written any laws. And as far as he was concerned, or the American history text was concerned, we hadn't built the government. So who are we and why do we matter? As women, as people of color, as anyone who's not a part of that master narrative. And I know there's a master narrative because we tell it every year for 12 years. Right. And that's what we test them on. And that's the master narrative. And I said, how do I rise above that? Because I can't fight that. Mm-hmm. I can't fight what the system deems as important. And I can't make myself important to anyone else other than me. I can't make my life or my desires important to someone else. And I'm not in charge of that. President is, it seems, or maybe the head of the education department, but I'm not. So what is it that I can do? And at that moment, I said, I know that what's important to me is that I see a representation of me that's not Aunt Jemima. And even if it is Aunt Jemima, it is an understanding of Aunt Jemima. It's a relationship with her. She has value. What does she represent? What did she do? Why are we afraid to confront her? What are we confronting when we deal with her? Who is she and how does she relate to me? And all of these images of Blackness, even, Mammy, how do we relate to Mammy? Someone had a sale and they were selling some African American dolls and they called them Mammy. And I make African American dolls. And I was trying to figure out what qualified that particular doll to be a mammy to that person, and what did that mean? So I'm really interested in these images of women and Black people and Black women and the unspoken story that we're expected to get and to understand and to internalize, but never speak on. There's this expectation that you marry a white woman. Now, I don't know if you're married to a white woman or not, but I know that everything in our society prepares you for that. Now, you may reject that, but that's what you're being prepared for. You've been prepared for a white woman, and she's supposed to be a certain way. She's supposed to be Cinderella. She's supposed to be someone you can dote on. All of these ideas of who you're supposed to be as a man and how you're supposed to take care of that woman, take care of her, and what your responsibility. We get all of the stuff dumped on us.
Yeah.
But it's no one verbalizes it. No one really talks to you about it. They just expect you to get it. And the same thing is true in our relationships with people who are different from us, regardless of whether they have money or the color of their skin or their age or their ability or their gender or sexuality. We got all of these subliminal thoughts going on, and we don't talk about it. So I wanted to talk about Black women because I felt like, based upon those experiences, people had expectations of me. And that was something that I fit into. I am Black and I am a woman. Who am I? What do I bring? What is my value? How do I know that? Who represented me before I became me? How did I get to be me? Whose history am I carrying? Whose history do I pass on? You know, what story do I tell? And I decided I want to create Black women, and I want to create them in a way that shows this deep love for them. Mm-hmm. Love my mother. Almost everything I do is my mother. My first sculpture, that's my mother. Me and my sister and my mother. The next sculpture, me and my mother. Mm-hmm. You know, every time she may look a little bit different, her features may change, her skirt may change. You know, there may be differences, but there's that energy the whole time. I'm making a stone sculpture in particular, is I'm thinking about this love relationship that I have with this woman who brought me here, you know? And I think that we all have relationships with women, but we don't explore them. Boys aren't really encouraged to explore their love for their mother. To feel it, yes, but to really be able to understand why they feel so drawn to this woman and what you take from that woman and what you look for in the next woman that you're in a relationship with because of what you got from that woman. Mm-hmm. And that relationship with that woman is what makes it possible for you to have a relationship over here with another woman, and how you are caught up in that web too. So I'm interested in women in that way, and that ability to present them with that overwhelming love and regard. And that's the work that I do, whether I'm doing sculpture, stone, or whether I am, you know, taking a story that I've researched and tried to find a way to create it using printmaking and bookmaking.
Mm-hmm. You talked about, when you talked before, you said that when you started stone sculpture, you were taking marble stairs out of Baltimore. Can you talk about that process and what the significance of that material and that the way they're used is in the practice, and maybe why stone sculpture could be it?
Well, one, where else would I find something big enough to create a monument? Me, where would I find it? You know, I'm looking around. I don't see a whole bunch of stones.
Yeah.
So that was the one stone I knew about. It was going through Baltimore. I was like, wow, look at the steps are made out of marble. And then I found that there was a recycle place there where people, they bought an old house in Baltimore and they'd have somebody make them a new step, and they take the old step to the dump. And so I went to this recycle place that recycled old steps.
Yeah.
And it was a salvage place. And I paid $100 for a marble step. And the guy delivered it, which was like 45 miles away.
Wow.
And I turned it on its side, and I was like, okay, now this is going to be my first monument.
Yeah.
So that's why I ended up doing that. But one of the things I love about being in a relationship with the marble is I've done enough research to know that there are not a lot of African-American women who carve marble. And I know that there is a historic relationship. In 1865, Mary Edmonia Lewis, who was a sculptor, who carved, I believe, Sherman. I think he carved, I know she carved Abraham Lincoln and quite a few other folks during the Civil War. She was part Native American, and she was part, her father was from Haiti. 1865, she was a sculptor her mother was Native American, so she learned to do Native American style sculpture. But her mother dies. She lives with her father. At the end of the Civil War, she does a few more sculptures here, and then she goes to Europe and becomes a sculptor there in Rome. That was 1865. Then the next one is like 1910. And then the next one is like 1940. And then you get to, who really stand out, Elizabeth Catlin. Yep. In the last 40 years. She passed away in Mexico, her work. But if you look at their works, that stone sculpture and marble, Mariette Monia Lewis did it because she had access in Rome to that white marble in Italy. Because she worked for the Roman Catholic Church, creating sculpture for them. And she would bring it back to the United States in the 1870s and 1880s. And she would sell it all at one time. But she was one of the few people who actually carved white marble, stone. But you have to get it in a certain place. But these other sculptors who I love, they used all different kinds of stone. They might use sandstone. They might use soapstone. They might find some black stone. They had a whole lot of different other stones because you didn't have access to that white Italian stone. Right. It wasn't in high, it was, you couldn't get it in volume and it wasn't readily available. And so I found that part to be very interesting, the rarity of the opportunity to work in that particular medium that in many ways is associated with whiteness because it is white. Mm-hmm. And sculpture is associated with whiteness. Yep. Because most sculptors are white people. So the idea of using something that's being discarded, something whiteness that's being discarded. Yeah. To create something that represents blackness. Yeah. That's a real interesting kind of push-pull thing going on there. Mm-hmm. And then to be working with that stone and trying to bring forth that blackness, that womanness out of something as hard as stone, which women are the opposite of. This particular piece, she's a mother. I didn't know that she was going to be a mother. I knew that she was going to be a Black woman. When I started, it's almost 4.5, maybe 5 feet tall. I knew it was going to be a Black woman. I was aiming to create as big a Black woman, as strong a Black woman as I could create. But as I worked from the top down, I find these 2 children clinging to her, but she's looking forward. And I'm struggling in this relationship too, because I'm like, why aren't you like the soft mother looking at your children like you see in most sculptures, or, doing that loving thing. And what's interesting is when you're an artist, I think with anything, if you got to listen to your work, you got to be able to look at your work and see what does the work want to do. What I want to do might not be where that print wants to land. Where I get that shadow that I didn't intend to have. And am I willing to allow that shadow to exist and to discover what it means because it intended to be there, not because I was trying to put it there? Do I feel like a failure when I can't register something properly? Of course. But the truth is that sometimes it's important not to be so registered, So anyway, working with the stone and listening to it, one of the things that I got from the stone was like, you don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. I am a mother who is here to protect her children, not here to coddle her children. I want to protect them so they can grow up and be whole. And being able to hear that energy come from a stone, of what it means to be a mother. I loved that relationship, and I took probably 3 years to carve that stone. So stonework for me is a side gig, it's a side hustle because it takes so long and it can't make me any money. So I got to tend to it when I can. Yeah. But to hear that stone say, this woman, I've been hiding beneath this step for years with my children, and people have walked on me, they've walked over me, they haven't seen me or recognized me, but I've been here all along. And to have that come forth out of that stone and to be in a relationship with energy, because stone is nothing but energy. Your hair is energy. Your hair is alive. Even if they cut it off your head, it's still going to hold that DNA. That stone holds DNA. And it's great scientists could evaluate your hair and be able to tell us all sorts of things about you. My ability as a sculptor in a relationship with the stone is to be able to dig deep enough in the soil of the stone, because the stone is soil, it's DNA, it's matter, and to have it be able to speak, that's way beyond me. But I enjoy working with stone.
Yeah. Well, that's really powerful. I love that metaphor of the family, in the stairs being tread upon. That's pretty profound. Um, Speaking about, sort of maintaining flexibility and sort of embracing imperfection, I think it's a good way to transition into your books, which are really amazing. I find that the ones that I've seen on your site and things are almost organic. They feel like well-loved objects. And that's in contrast sometimes to artist books that can be so precise you almost are afraid to crack them open. You don't want to touch them because they're so pristine. So how does your approach to bookmaking complement your relationship with books and how you want to share them with your audience?
So I would say that I like stuff. I
Uh-huh.
like dirt,
Mm-hmm.
and I like paper. I like thread. I like fabric. I like glass. I like stuff. I like color, and I'm drawn to stuff. I can walk down the street and see a piece of broken glass and it's got a certain purple, and I'm drawn to it. I'm not a painter,
Mm-hmm.
but I love that sense of color. And it's like, I want to do that. I want to use that. I want to own that. I want to embed that. I want to be in a relationship with that color, but I don't know how to make it. So I pick it up and I put it in my pocket and I walk around with it until I get it back in my studio, and I put it down and I say, ooh, I'm going to see how you expand. And then to take all these other little bits of stuff and add it to it and wait to see what it creates. And I know that there is a theme in me because I see all of my work together.
Mm-hmm.
The theme is, for me, a reoccurring theme. Like if you think about Romare Bearden, if you look at Romare Bearden's work, one of the things that you see coming through his work is the train. He's always working with that train image. He's working with, there are certain motifs that you'll find in his work. I'm like that too. It is the house, the dwelling. And it's because home is so central to who I am and what I think about all the time, the little house that I grew up in. You probably yourself think about that room that you slept in and where you kept your favorite, whatever it was that was important to you, that you didn't want anybody to bother. All of us have this relationship with space and stuff. And so when I'm working with stuff, I'm thinking about my space, and that space is that dwelling. So inevitably, I'm always going to create something that relates to the dwelling. Mm-hmm. So that's one part of my practice, is creating these things from stuff. So it can't be precious because it's just stuff I found on the ground or stuff that I cobbled together, and I can't make it so that no one wants to touch it.
Right.
But I need to use it for my own soul's sake. It's not for any other reason other than I want to be in a relationship with that color purple, and I want to incorporate it in something. Now, that's the tactile side of me. But then there is the storytelling side of me that's always got a story that I'm working on, and I'm struggling constantly to figure out what the environment or the characters or the interactions look like, and how I can do that and present that in a structured way so that one person at a time could sit and be in a relationship with that story. That's what's so precious about books. Even as a little girl, I loved back to school. I loved back to school because we would get our school books, and I loved cracking the book open. I loved new paper and pencils and being able to write my name in the book. So all of those things around books and writing and reading is like publishing. And so I guess that's why I just find myself so drawn to book arts, because it's a way of me being able to bring all the stuff that I love under one roof, kind of like IBé Art Institute.
That's actually a perfect way to transition into my next question, which is how uh, how an artist's book helped make your current manifestation of the Art Institute a reality for you.
So, I went to Women's Studio Workshop to
Mm-hmm.
work on a book project about a woman who had been in the state penitentiary of Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And she was from near my hometown of Danville, Virginia. The book title is 11033. And I didn't know the book title when I sent it off to Women's Studio Workshop. I don't think I knew the title, but that was her prison number. I do think I knew that title. And I had done a lot of research on her because she was so close to my hometown. But I didn't know her. She was born in she went to prison in 1913 or 14, and she got out in 1921 or so. But she had twins while she was in the state penitentiary. And in thinking about her story, I had to figure out how would I represent her. So I created a clay model of her, and and I wanted it to be centered in the middle of the book, because I wanted the book to be able to stand up. And so I sent off this mock-up to a studio workshop, and it was made out of brown paper bag. I love stuff. Brown paper bag is one of my stuffs.
Mm-hmm.
So it was made out of brown paper bag, and they asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I'd love to be able to make paper, and I'd love to make it look like a brown paper bag. And so I wanted to create this clay model, and I had this story, this researched story that I wanted to put it together. Yeah. And they accepted the project, and I went there for 8 weeks, and I created this project with Chris Patrone and a beautiful staff of interns and other ceramicists, and it was just a wonderful experience. I made 52 of those books. They were exactly alike, and they were just so well received. I mean, major libraries bought that particular book, like my alma mater, VCU, University of Virginia, New York Public Library, the British Library, Library of Congress, Smithsonian. I mean, all the way to California and Seattle, Washington, and museums. And I'm like, whoa, all of these people bought this book. And I realized that I had enough to buy this property. But it was in really bad condition. But I said, that's okay. It's like a sculpture. Mm-hmm. It's like I'm going to build it. I'm going to rebuild it. I'm going to take something that's falling down, that the roof is caving in and the fireplace is falling out, and I'm going to work with a team, and we're going to reconstruct this. It was a wonderful experience. I learned so much about architecture and design, but most importantly about people. Mm-hmm. And working with people. And one of the biggest parts of that is I am a woman, and I was doing a project that relied totally on men, because this is a man's profession: construction, roofing, bricklaying. Typically. And so here I am interested in women's work, but now I need to learn how to build something with men. And so it was a 3-year project, but I learned just a tremendous amount. And so here I have a gallery. So all of my sculpture gets to be in one place, and my book work gets to be in one place. And that's an old classroom. This was a 2-room schoolhouse. Mm-hmm. So one of the classrooms I use is the gallery, and I entertain. College students come, interns, artist groups, and we sit in a circle in the gallery, and it's surrounded by images in stone and wood and paper of women, and particularly African-American women. And we have conversations about their experiences and feelings and thoughts. And so that's one space. Then the second classroom room is a 2-room schoolhouse. One classroom I use as my studio. Mm-hmm. So I stitch, I sew, I construct, I carve. That's my workspace. And then on the end, someone did a little addition. And in that little tiny addition that was probably built in 1856 is what I call the library. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty raw. I left the brick fireplace and the open beams on the walls because I was like, people have to see what this was when I came here.
Yeah.
And left that and built bookshelves. And so that is the library. And I guess in the 1980s, somebody bought this property but didn't finish it. They added on this little room. And this room I call the residence. And in this, you see it has a bed and has a kitchen. And it's just one room, and it's got a bathroom. And I use this as a retreat.
That's great.
And sometimes it's a couple retreat, sometimes a couple, and there's no TV, it has the internet. So when people come, they're forced to deal with themselves because it's a really quiet space. And it's, like I said, overlooking the James River. And so this is the way that I'm able to pay the utilities and pay the taxes, because I use the book to buy the building, and then subsequent works used it to do the repairs. And
right.
So IBé Art Institute can stand on its own.
Can you talk a little bit about how you settled on the price for 11033? Because I think that could be really useful, especially since the majority of our members are, well, at least half our members are students, right? And they're just beginning their careers. They're practically giving their work away because a lot of it's been done for assignments. They're just starting to come into realizing what their work is worth. So I think it could be really helpful to them.
Well, it takes a long time
Yeah.
to, I think, to build up a practice. Because I think that, of course, when you're in school, you're learning how to do your particular style from someone else. That's why you go to school. So I'm going to talk a little bit about pricing and sales. That's a hard one.
Sure.
When the first thing I did, particularly for for 11033, and that was my first big sale, and I had sold bits and pieces of work for years, but always at low prices. Because part of it had to do with not having a very strong clientele. The other part was that I didn't have a large body of work. And for me, I think that one of my customers of my stonework would say, the reason you don't sell more stonework is because you like your work too much. I did. I love my work so much that I really didn't want to part with it. So I wasn't like really pushing it. And I had a day job. So selling work was not the thing that, I wasn't in it to make money. I was in it because I wanted to make the work. But with 11033, I think that one of the things that helped me with that was that I looked at all of the other sales of work similar to mine at that time period. Like, for example, I didn't know the value of handmade paper. I didn't know it had value. I just wanted to make paper. But when I did the research, I realized that a book that was made with handmade paper had more value than a book made with commercial paper because of the amount of time it takes to make the paper. Right. Because of the investment in the paper. The paper becomes more than a substrate, something that you're printing on. The paper itself is a piece of art. And I had never thought about it like that before. Then screen printing was one technique that I learned. And screen printing is fairly accessible in terms of being a medium that you can build a screen printing station right in your kitchen. If you got that kind of space, or a place where you have running water, you can have a screen printing studio. You just have to, if you don't own a burner, then you need to find a way to get your screens burnt. But that's probably one of the more accessible ways.
Yeah.
The other is woodblock printing and lino cuts, because those you can do without a whole lot of equipment and a lot of expense. So thinking about and being honest with yourself about what is the value of the process that I'm using, because you have to decide whether or not that process is the one for you. Is that you just love lino cuts and you can make a bunch of them and it's more accessible than, let's say, copper plate etching, because you don't have the tools to be able to do it. You got to figure out what you have the tools for. I guess one of the things I want to say is this. I did this research on W.E.B. Du Bois. There's always a story.
Yeah.
After the Civil War, W.E.B. Du Bois evaluated Black businesses. And one of the things that he talked about in the late 1890s were those Black businesses that did these things. And I think this is true for artists also. Number one, own your own tools. If you don't own your own tools, whether screen printing, letterpress, lino cuts, paper making, if you don't own your tools, you have to go to somebody else to get their tools. So that makes you forever an apprentice. So that's number one, own your own tools. The other thing he talked about was invest in your practice. Buy your tools. When you make a sale, take the money from that sale and reinvest it in your work. Buy more brushes, buy paint, buy paper, buy screens. But take your money from the sale and invest it back in your practice. Because your practice is like a child. They're always hungry. You got to feed it all the time. Mm-hmm. So even if you make a sale, don't squander the money. Put it back in the practice. So owning your own tools, putting money back in your practice. That means that in the beginning, you can't pay yourself. We all think, I want to make money making art. Yes, we do, but you can't pay yourself. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. You got to find another way to take care of yourself, because in the first years, you're taking care of the practice. You're making it possible for you to do the work. It's like raising a child. So all the money's got to go back in it. You cannot pay yourself. Don't take yourself on vacation with money that you made from selling a print. Don't take your friends out to dinner because you sold a print. Put that money back in your practice. So don't pay yourself. The other thing was the cost of where you do your work has to be factored into the cost of the work. So if you are able to do your work in your basement, then the cost may be very low. But if you have great big paintings or big prints, or you need a large space for tables, then you might have to rent a studio. How much is that studio going to cost you? Where can it be the most accessible, the most affordable? But you got to take that monthly cost of a place to do the work into consideration and factor that into, I need $5,000 a year. I have to earn $5,000 a year in order to be able to have a studio, or $3,000 a year in order to be able to have a studio. So when you ask me about pricing, I would say that your work at that point is a business. Mm-hmm. There is the making side of it. There is the love affair that you have with the work. But then after the work is completed, what happens to that work? Is that work going to sit dormant and you look at it because you like it? Or is that work going to have traction, be shown to other people, be sold, move, be in shows, have to be stored? That work, you have now created something that you're responsible for. And selling it may be a part of that responsibility, like somebody else can take care of it better than me because it needs special care. So I think all of those things go into pricing. And then the last thing I was going to say, which was the first thing I was going to say, is that I looked at what other people were selling their work for, who were doing a similar work. So I could know what the baseline was, and whether or not I was trying to go too far above it, and whether it was justified, or whether I was too far below it and not giving myself enough consideration. But looking at finding that average price. So you may have one book person that sells a book for $10,000 and another person who sells a book for $200 that's like yours. Well, you got to figure out, well, where am I closest to? Am I closest to the $200 book? Or did I add on some things that they didn't have that makes my book worth $500? And am I so far from that $3,000 book? Those are the types of things. And then as you go through the practice and you get to a place where you're consistently selling at, let's say, that $1,500 range. You might say, how can I beef up that game? Or how can I stay steady with that? What do I have to do in order to nurture those customers? Who are my customers becomes a very important part of the business side of taking care of art. The art has to be taken care of. So if you have customers, how do you nurture the same customer? For example, let's say you make prints about equipment. You love tractors and those kinds of things, and so you do all these prints about them. Well, where are you going to market it? Maybe it's a tractor company down the street. Maybe there's one in the next state over. Maybe you might want to have them as your customer because that becomes your bread and butter. And then you do the rest of them and just fun off the beaten path kind of tractors. But figuring out who are my customers, who am I going to make some money from? And then not having too many customers, because if you have too many, you can't satisfy everybody. So figure out who your bread and butter customers are from the beginning so that you can nurture those relationships and then build on. So those are all my thoughts about money and the practice and the business of making money.
Well, I liked what you had mentioned to me before about 11033, that you settled on a price after doing some research and looking at comparable artists, and then the price that you ultimately settled on was well beyond what you had initially estimated yourself at.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was because I didn't know the value of the paper. So that's one thing. You may be working in a certain medium, but not know the value of it. So I didn't know how valuable handmade paper was. Secondly, I didn't know how valuable doing authentic research and printing it on handmade paper was. I didn't know. Then I added another component, which was the clay sculpture, which added a whole nother level of value. So at the end, I came to understand that everything, all of the different parts of that book is what made it worth, 6 times what I had in my mind. Because I had so many different processes in that one thing. But the thing I've had to caution myself on is that very first project, I had a team. I had a master paper maker teaching me to make paper. I had a master ceramicist teaching me to do the ceramics. I wasn't just, having taken it in college and just doing it on my own. I was working with people who knew what that end product was supposed to look like, and they helped me to get there. And that's so important. Everybody needs a teacher, no matter where you are in your career. Find somebody that's doing something that you want to learn to do, and learn alongside of them and respect their work. So that was the thing that I've had to come to terms with since then, is that my next book, I had one assistant. My first book, I had 5 people. My next book, maybe I had 2 people. My next book, I maybe had 1 person. I was like, wow, why am I struggling to get this finished? I can't do 52. I can't do 52 because it's just one of me. Before I had 6 of me. I had 6 people working with me, or 3 people working with me. So one of the things that I came to understand was the more hands, the more help. Collaborative work is wonderful, because if you work with other people, then people take different parts of the project. So now I'm at a place where, no, well, it's not true, but it's taken me a long time to get to a place where I can say I can consistently charge a certain amount. But right away, I realized I couldn't charge that high amount because I couldn't reach that standard, because it was just me. And since that time, I've added on an administrative assistant. I've added on, a fabricator. And I know how to get those support services. So now I can up my game, because now I know how to access that.
Got it. That's helpful. So, this is a printmaking publication. So you mind talking about how you were introduced to printmaking, what your first encounter was like with the medium, and how you chose to integrate it into your practice?
Yeah, again, back at Women's Studio Workshop, I learned so much in that residency. It was an eight-week residency. And what was remarkable about it was that it was during COVID. So I was the only artist there, where they would normally have 5 or 6 artists. So they'd have somebody in the clay studio, the paper studio, the printmaking studio, the etching press. They would have somebody everywhere. But it was only me. And that meant that I had assistants in all of those studios, and all of them had been to college and studied in their given field. So they were really good at what they did. And I had a young lady who was this fabulous screen printer. I mean, she was just really good at it. And she just showed me the ins and outs. And I really enjoyed the process. And I would have handwritten that first book, because I didn't know how to do screen printing, but she showed me how to do that. So I started doing that there. And when I left from the studio workshop, her last name was Perez. I'll tell you her first name in just a few minutes. I have to think of it. And then I left there and I went to Viz Arts in Richmond, the Visual Arts Center in Richmond, and they had screen printing. And I started working with Alex there, and Alex is a wonderful screen printer. And I started doing printmaking with her there. And while I was there, someone else taught copper etching. And I had done copper etching workshop. So went back to Richmond, and at Viz Arts, I did some copper etching. And so then I had those 2 experiences with that. And then, printing. Did a lot of printing there. I think that those were my big places, was Viz Arts and the Women's Studio Workshop. Oh, and then I went to Pyramid Atlantic, and I did some paper making there. I did some screen printing there. So those have been my experiences. And then last year, I went to Penland. Mm-hmm. And at Penland, I studied with Delita Martin and Thomas Lucas. And they are both master printmakers. Delita does this mixed media monoprints. Yep. And I think they're multicolored. And so I learned a lot from her. But Thomas Lucas does photolithography. And so I learned photolithography from him, and I did a book project. And then I took a workshop with Julie Chen. Mm-hmm. And Julie Chen is another master bookmaker. She's really a fantastic book engineer. So when you say books that you are just really careful with, I mean, they're so precise and so measured and exact, and her story flows, and she's a master binder, like Chris Patrone was a master binder. For me, they just embodied all of these different things like pop-up books, pressure printing in books. Mm-hmm. So I learned a lot from Julie Chen. And so after I did that with her, I came back and I went back to Viz Arts, and I keep recycling people. If I find someone does something well, I learn something from them for a while, and then I'll go and learn something from somebody else, and then I'll come back to them because I feel like they respect me a little bit more because they see that I didn't just stop with them. I went and learned something else, and I came back, and they can help me correct some of my errors. And one of the things is funny because at Viz Arts, I also do a lot of letterpress printing, and I learned a letterpress print there with Paul. He's an excellent letterpress person. And then I went and did letterpress with Sarah Matthews at Pyramid Atlantic, and I did letterpress with Julie Chen at Penland. So I've done quite a bit of letterpress. But then I went back to Paul and I said, Paul, I want you to reteach me to clean the equipment, because I cleaned it with Julie Chen. She's very precise, and you got it showing no residue, nothing left over. The next person coming in, that press should be spick and span. And so I wanted to make sure I was getting it right. And so I find that relearning things as a printmaker, how much pressure to put when I'm doing screen printing. I said, Alex, I'm just not getting a good enough image. And most recently, And of course, I did woodblock printing with, and I'll tell you his name in just a minute. But I was really interested in working with him for a long time. He's a Richmond artist here, and his name will come to me. And then I was interested in laser cut printing. Mm-hmm. So Julie Chen did a laser cut printing workshop, and I worked with Erin, her assistant, and Stephanie, who's now at the Hamilton. She and I did a laser cut project together. So I did a few laser cut projects, and I came back to IBé Arts again, and there's a wonderful young lady there named Arissa Lopez, and she's an excellent laser. She's really good on the computer in terms of the graphics. And then I went to a laser cutter here in Richmond. His name is Ben, and he's at Big Secret, and he does laser cutting. And so he helped me with my maps, and I was able to reorient. So I just try to find people who are doing the things that I want to include in my books and get them to teach me. And I try to include as many different mediums as I can as a printmaker, because the more options I have, sometimes something won't work as a screen print. I need to do it as a laser cut, or I need to do it as a hand cut, or today I'm going to be doing some old photographs, and I want to use them in this project, and it's just easier for me to do a digital print on a really thin paper, but it's going to be a little challenging. So figuring out different ways to print is really important.
Yeah. Well, I really like you sharing all this, because it's a good illustration and reminder for all of us that printmaking is, a continuing learning process. A lot of us wound up taking a lot of printmaking in college, and you can walk away feeling like you know what you're doing, but to really be a printmaker, you got to commit yourself to it for life, because there's always new things to learn. It's part of the reason why I love the medium so much.
Yeah, I can understand.
Yeah. So let's see. So this summer 2025, you're scheduled to work through the IBé Artist Initiative at Hamilton, Wood Type and Printing Museum. That experience didn't happen, right? There's certainly overlap between the book arts and letterpress community and the broader printmaking community. But for those readers who perhaps missed what's been going on lately, could you please explain what happened in your own words?
I have this book project, and the title is Exchange.
Right.
It's a story of women. It's a story of women in Shako Bottom. And I've been working on this book for a long time. And this year, I applied for a residency at the Hamilton because I wanted to do letterpress in this book project. Mm-hmm. So I've been printing it, with inks. And I've done about 350 pages. Wow. So I was really super excited to be able to go there and do the letterpress on their equipment, because on the Vandercook, you can print a lot of sheets really fast.
Yeah.
The week before I was to leave for their residency, I received a cancellation saying that I couldn't come. So I reached out to them, and they just said that because they were reevaluating their initiatives, that I could not do the residency, and that they would not pay me. And so the paying part wasn't like a big deal, because it wasn't like a whole ton of money. But I said, well, you have it set up on your website that a person can come there and pay $100 a day. Even if they don't know how to print, you'll help them, you show them how to use the machine. I know how to print. I'll pay $100 a day. May I come and print? And I was told I couldn't print there at all. So I said, well, can I talk to the board to find out what happened? What were they thinking? What was their conversation? What initiative are they evaluating that I fit into that makes me inappropriate to even pay to print? But I was told that they didn't want to talk to me at that time. And it was interesting because, our communities of journalism and printmaking and graphic design, we're so many different communities. We're bookmakers and we're printers and we're designers and all these different things. But at the end of the day, we are artists who archive and document our reality. And because that's what we're doing, it's important that we have access to the press. And I believe that our larger community was concerned when I wasn't allowed to print there without an explanation that justified, not being able to print there. Just that not getting an explanation for why I couldn't print there. I think it created this uproar. I know it did. We had about, I would say on my site alone, maybe 40,000 people who watched and engaged with this process of recognizing harm had been done by not being able to print there. And it was harm to me because, as I said, the book project I've been working on really diligently for 2 years. So it really set me back in terms of, okay, now what do I do? This is work I need to do, but I'm not being allowed to do it. What do I do now? But more important than it being harm to me, it was harm to the larger printmaking community who really took offense because of the times that we're living in. I believe, this is my summation, is that we're living in a time where people associated with media feel that they are being censored, that they don't have freedom of expression, that they don't have freedom of the press or freedom of access or freedom of communication or freedom of information, and that there are barriers being erected to prevent us from doing what we do, which is documenting and archiving reality.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's one of the reasons that folks were like, hey, wait a minute, you can't just go around denying us the right to a free press. And the expectation was that the Hamilton would be a free press because on their website, they say you can pay $100 to come there and print, and that they would teach you to print if you don't know how. So it seemed like an injustice, not simply because they're saying we can't afford to pay you, not because they're saying we don't want that particular program, but because they're saying you cannot use this equipment. So as I approached it with, my grandfather in mind. And he would have said, and he did say to me in my sleep, he said, this bridge is not built yet. You have to cross. You have to go there. You have to be engaged in this repair. And what I've come to understand is that the break in the commitment that the Hamilton had made with the print community, that it would be an access point to our democracy, is something that has to be repaired. And I think that just speaks, like I say, to that larger need. We have a real need for people to have access to the press right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we talk a lot in printmaking that, we're the democratic medium, but we don't always put our money where our mouth is. And I feel like there's a real opportunity for us to be doing that. And I'm happy to see how much camaraderie there's been in the letterpress community as of late, really rallying behind this idea of protecting protecting access and equal access, that everyone should be able to uh, continue to participate in the museum. And as it turned out, you were in good company. You weren't the only person who had their commitment canceled. And I'm really glad that you've agreed to curate an exhibition in the journal featuring some of the other people that were affected by this, and that we're able to provide a space to share you and others. And I hope that can lead to some more integration of the letterpress and broader printmaking communities. I was talking with, I think it was Jen Graves recently, and said, I'm not a printmaker, or, I'm not a letterpress person. I ran a press for a while and didn't feel like I had the chops for it. But now I see, like, I wish I'd stuck around because it seems like a really tight community that be good to be part of.
Yeah, I'm really proud to learn so much about so many different people doing the work.
Mhm. Um, you just mentioned your grandfather coming to mind, and during this process, would you like to speak any more about how his participation in the civil rights movement felt like a sort of call to arms for you in this moment?
It is amazing to me. It's like an out of body experience.
Hmm.
That was 60 years ago. And
Hmm.
here we are 60 years later, still trying to get what we believe are our basic civil rights.
Yeah.
And the civil rights are, the freedom of the press, the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. That is a civil right.
Mhm.
And it was something that was guaranteed to us in the Constitution.
Yeah.
And it's so important. As I said, my grandfather read the newspaper. He had a third grade education. He read the newspaper from cover to cover
Mhm.
and shared the newspaper with our neighbor. That's how important the press was and continues to be.
Yeah.
So I feel really honored to be a part of the print community. And when I went away to college, it's so amazing to me to look back on it now. Based on, it's hard to believe. But my grandmother had two friends, and they lived, I don't know, I think in Lynchburg, Virginia. And she sent me, his name was James, and his wife's name was Pat. And they had a print shop. Amazing. I
Yeah.
don't think I ever met anybody else who had a print shop. And they worked together. And I went there, and they were someone my grandmother was so proud of.
Yeah.
And so I think that thinking about my grandparents and how important literacy was to them, and how they equated being smart with not good grades or even the type of job that you had, but with your ability to read and digest information and participate in a discussion in a reasonable way and argue at the kitchen table
Yeah.
and argue your perspective and listen to others. And so I think that that's what we're struggling to do. It, all of us who are in the press, is to present a perspective, not the only perspective, not the best perspective, just a perspective, so that all the people sitting at the table with us has more information and that we've shared with them from our perspective. So I think that that's what I think about my grandfather, is that he would say that in this moment, this is just a continuation. And that's what I felt like he was saying to me when I was there, is you have to move forward with this without fear. And when I went to the Hamilton, I said to Stephanie, and I went to see her,
Yeah.
and I like her. She's such a lovely young lady.
Yeah.
And I knew she was very disappointed that the residency didn't happen. And I wanted her to know that I did not hold any animosity towards her or towards the museum,
Hmm.
because people make decisions and they're not always the best decisions. They may not be the best for me, and it may not be the best for our community, but they made a decision. I want them to do better. But what I really wanted to do was just show up, just to say, the press is going to continue to show up. Even though the president or the vice president or the secretary of state may say, you know, that particular person can't come in here, we're going to show up just to say we have a responsibility to communicate with our community what we see. And we're going to come in nonviolence. We're going to come peacefully, but we're going to come because our community deserves the right to exist, the right to assembly, the right to speech, the right to understand decisions that are being made. Those are my big ideas.
Yeah.
That's how I operate.
I love that. Um, so you've been talking today about exchange off and on. Um, and you told me the other day that you're about ready to head up to DC to do some research. You want to tell us a little bit more about the irons that are in the fire and what's next for you?
Well, I'll talk about those at a later point. But I
Okay.
will say that one of the things that I'm involved with are a variety of groups of people.
Mhm.
And I have an association with the African American Craft Alliance.
Mhm.
It's a wonderful group of senior women who are artists in Washington, D.C. And they have done beautiful documentary work on the history of African American doll makers, or the history of African American puppets, or
Mhm.
the history of African American fashion. So, and these are predominantly seniors.
Mhm.
And I'm just so proud to be a part of them and to watch what they're doing. And every opportunity I get when they have a new project and they ask me to jump on it, I'm like, okay, what's my role? How do I do this? So I'm always there to do a little bit of research. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a little bit of research with them. And then I'm going to sit back with whatever it is that I am able to grasp out of our research experience. And I'm going to ask myself, how do I use it representationally to tell another piece of our American story?
Mhm. That's
But I
great.
do want to end with talking about my newest work,
Yeah.
which is Shako, 1856, and the book is titled uh, Exchange.
Yeah.
And I'm excited by it because it allowed me to create an environment that I could not see, that haunted me. I knew it existed, but I could not see it. And once I created it using the historic record, and I could see it, and I could put houses in a particular place, and I could create this map made based upon historic documents, but that doesn't exist now and has not existed for a long time. I felt like, wow, what an amazing way to take the past and bring it to life.
Mhm.
And so that's what this book Exchange is allowing me to do. It has a variety of meat printing techniques, from laser cutting to hand cutting to pressure printing to letterpress printing. I mean, just an amazing array of printing techniques. And I will be presenting it at Kodak's in February 2026, as I will be on a panel there. And I'm really excited. And after that, I hope that maybe you and I can show all of the images from it at some point in your journal.
That'd be fabulous. Yeah, I would love that. Um, so do you mind me asking, do you have a another lead as to where you're going to do your letterpress printing for that project now? Because,
I
yeah,
have a couple of different, I had I had a lot of people come out of the woodwork after this
good.
Hamilton. I have a wonderful young couple in Berkeley, California, who's invited me there to print.
Great.
I have another institution uh, that has asked me there to print. I already had an application in the works for, I have a second book project that's going to be in display at the Minnesota Center for the Book.
Hmm.
11033 went on tour
Uh-huh.
from the San Francisco Center of the Book all the way to the Bainbridge Island Museum, around to the state of New York, and all the way back down to the National Museum in Washington.
Mhm.
Now, 11033 is on a different tour, and it's going to go to Georgia, and it's going to go to Minnesota Center for the Book a second time. So
Mhm.
I'd love to be able to print there at some point, since I have a book that's current, that's already slated to be there again. So those are some of the things that I'm looking at, but I think that things unfold, and I trust the process. So I'm not too worried. I know that I'm going to figure this out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's one of the great things about being a printmaker is we play well together. So if folks need something, we tend to
Yes.
step forward and help each other out. So if you need anything, by all means, let us know.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to thank you so much for your time, and we'll keep checking you out. Good luck with exchange.
All right, I appreciate it.
We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Okay.
Take care.
Bye.